Michelle Knight was 21 when she disappeared. Small in stature, barely over 4'7", with a quiet toughness molded by hardship. Life had never been kind to her, and she had long ago stopped expecting it to be. She had grown up in Cleveland, bouncing between relatives, trying to shield her younger siblings from the worst parts of home. She loved art. She dreamed of becoming a vet, but the dream was already slipping away by the time she was a teenager. Abuse, instability, and poverty clung to her like shadows. By 2002, she was a single mother to a toddler named Joey, desperate to get him back from state custody. That's what she was doing the day she went missing, walking to a court appointment about her son. She never made it. Nobody seemed to notice. Her photo wasn't plastered on street corners. There were no candlelight vigils. Police assumed she had run away, maybe to escape the court process, maybe to start fresh. She was 21, legally an adult. It was easier to close her case than to search for answers. Her name slipped off the radar and into silence. The man who took her was named Ariel Castro, a school bus driver. He lived in a peeling, two-story home on Seymour Avenue, just a few miles from where Michelle walked that day. To outsiders, he seemed like a loner, a little strange. He had children of his own, was divorced, played bass guitar in a local salsa band. The house smelled of dust and secrets. He had already built the prison he would put her in, boarded windows, bolted doors, heavy chains. Michelle became the first. He lured her in with the promise of a puppy. He said his dog had just had puppies, and he remembered she loved animals. He seemed kind, harmless. She followed him to his house, thinking she'd be right back. Once inside, the door locked behind her. And just like that, Michelle Knight vanished from the world. Amanda Berry was next. She was 17, bright and funny, with a warm voice that lit up every room she entered. She worked at Burger King and was saving up for a cell phone. Her birthday was the next day, and she was excited. She had already picked out her outfit. She disappeared on April 21st, 2003, a Monday, walking home from her shift. Her mother, Lawana, immediately knew something was wrong. Amanda always called. Always. When the phone didn't ring, when the front door didn't creak open, Lawana reported her missing that same night. The media paid attention this time. Amanda was young, white, and attractive. Her mother refused to be quiet. She went on TV, passed out flyers, begged anyone who would listen. She never stopped searching. Not once. What no one knew was that Amanda had also ended up on Seymour Avenue. Ariel Castro had offered her a ride. She knew his daughter. They had gone to school together. He played the familiar face. She trusted him. He took her into the same house where Michelle Knight had been living for nearly a year in darkness. Amanda joined her in that prison. She was chained, beaten, starved. The windows were nailed shut, the doors locked from the outside. Ariel had installed an alarm on the hallway. He boarded up vents so voices wouldn't travel. The girls were only allowed to speak when he permitted it, and if they disobeyed, the punishment was swift. Amanda Berry had vanished just blocks from home, and now she was trapped in hell, a prisoner, in a house that looked ordinary from the street. Gina DeJesus was the third. She was just 14 years old, a quiet girl from a close-knit Puerto Rican family. She and her best friend Arlene, Ariel Castro's daughter, had walked home from school together on April 2, 2004. They split at the corner, like always. Gina was supposed to be home in 10 minutes. Ariel pulled up beside her and said Arlene was at his house. Want to come say hi? She hesitated. He was her friend's dad. A little weird, but familiar. She got in. He drove her to Seymour Avenue. She never left. Point 3 girls. 3 lives, stolen in plain sight. And no one knew. Inside that house, time collapsed. Michelle had already been there for nearly 2 years when Gina arrived. Amanda for one. They lived in separate rooms. They communicated in whispers, through thin walls, scribbled notes. Ariel kept them apart when he could, pitted them against each other, manipulated them with the kind of precision only a narcissist could manage. He controlled their food, their clothes, their names. He beat them, raped them, starved them, isolated them. Michelle Knight would later say she lost track of time completely. The only way to know the seasons was by the thickness of the air leaking through the boarded windows that he got them pregnant. Again and again, Michelle was pregnant at least 5 times. Each time, Ariel beat her until she miscarried, punched her in the stomach, starved her, kicked her. She said he blamed her for killing the baby each time. But it was him. Always him. Amanda Berry got pregnant too. In 2006, she gave birth to a daughter, Jocelyn, in a plastic kiddie pool in the same room she had been raped in for years. Michelle helped deliver the baby. Ariel allowed it. He needed someone to keep the child alive. Jocelyn was born into captivity. She grew up believing Ariel Castro was her father, that Amanda was her mom, and that the other two women were simply bad girls who lived behind locked doors. Jocelyn had toys, clothes, a TV. Ariel began letting Amanda walk her around the yard. Only briefly, only under supervision, only after covering the windows and locking the gates. The girls began measuring freedom in inches. A slightly longer chain. A second blanket. A spoon instead of a fork. The ability to hear your child laugh. Even if you're still locked inside, the house remained invisible to the outside world. The neighbors heard nothing. Some said they saw a shadow in the window. Others thought the place was abandoned. Ariel still played music in his band. Still attended family parties. Still drove a school bus. No one asked questions. Amanda Berry's face remained on posters. Her mother died in 2006 of heart failure, never knowing her daughter was alive. Michelle's name never returned to the news. Gina's family, especially her father, kept searching. They held vigils, rallies, pressed police to keep the case open. For years, hope existed only in whispers, until one day, it screamed. It was May 6, 2013. A Monday. The air in Cleveland was warm. Normal. The kind of day where no one expects history to be rewritten. Inside the Seymour Avenue house, Amanda Berry was watching Jocelyn. The little girl was now 6, curious and bright. Lately, Jocelyn had started noticing things. That other children went outside. That other houses had unlocked doors. That her sisters, Michelle and Gina, were never allowed out. That day, Ariel Castro left the front door unusually unlocked. He told Amanda he was going out. He didn't take Jocelyn with him. Amanda's pulse rose. This had happened before, tiny cracks in his routine, but the risks of acting on them were enormous. Every failed attempt had consequences. Michelle had once tried to push open a bolted door. Ariel had broken her ribs. Gina had been caught whispering. Through a vent. He'd starved her for days. But this time felt different. Jocelyn wandered into the hallway and said quietly, "Daddy's car is gone." Amanda's heart thudded. She crept to the front of the house. The outer storm door was locked, but the inner wooden door was open. She stepped into the light for the first time in years. Saw the sky, smelled the world, and she screamed. She banged on the screen door, fists raw, shouting into the street, "Help me. I'm Amanda Berry. I've been kidnapped. I've been missing. For 10 years. Neighbors heard. Charles Ramsey, a man who lived next door, rushed over. At first he thought it was a domestic argument. Then he saw the panic in her eyes. He helped her kick through the bottom of the door. Amanda squeezed out Jocelyn in her arms and ran into the sun, barefoot, shaking. Charles handed her a phone. She dialed 911. The dispatcher answered. Amanda didn't wait. "Help me. I'm Amanda Berry. I've been kidnapped. I've been missing for 10 years, and I'm here now. I'm free." The line went quiet. The dispatcher tried to stay calm. "You," said who? "Amanda Berry. You need police?" "Yes. I'm at 2207 Seymour Avenue." Police raced to the address. When they arrived, Amanda ran into their arms. Breathless, crying. But before anyone could process what she said, she added more. "There are 2 more girls in the house. Gina DeJesus and Michelle Knight. He's had us all." They didn't wait for confirmation. They burst into the home, guns drawn, shouting commands. The house was dark, silent. Officers moved room by room until they found them. Michelle was in a small room, chained, her eyes swollen. Gina was in another, clutching a rosary. Both were stunned, half believing it was another trick. They had been told escape was impossible, that no one cared, that the world had forgotten, but the chains were real. And this time, the police had keys. Michelle Knight stepped out of the house after 11 years in captivity, blinking against the light. No one had looked for her. No one had remembered her face. But now, the world knew her name. Amanda Berry. Gina DeJesus. Michelle Knight. Free. The news exploded globally within hours. 3 women. 1 house. 11 years. Headlines screamed. Girls found alive. Cleveland horror house. Escape from hell. Crowds gathered at Seymour Avenue. Police barricaded the street. News vans swarmed the block. The house, once ignored, became a symbol of failure, resilience, and unspeakable cruelty. Ariel Castro was arrested the same night. He was at a McDonald's when the call came. He returned home to find squad cars, cameras, chaos. He looked confused. Almost annoyed, he said only 4 words. "They're trying to kill me." The next morning, investigators searched the house. What they found horrified even seasoned officers. Chains bolted to walls, doors with padlocks on the outside, bedrooms turned into cells, a makeshift alarm system, rope, a crawl space, diapers, fetal remains in a plastic bag, Michelle's miscarried. Children. The walls weren't just holding secrets. They were absorbing screams. Ariel Castro was charged with 512 counts of kidnapping, 446 counts of rape, 7 counts of gross sexual imposition, 6 counts of felonious assault, and multiple counts of aggravated murder for causing the death of unborn children. He pled guilty. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole, plus 1,000 years. In court, Michelle Knight faced him. She stood, tiny but unshaking, and looked him in the eye. "I spent 11 years in hell. Now your hell is just beginning." Amanda and Gina did not speak. They had said enough with their survival. Castro wept, claimed he wasn't a monster, that he was addicted to pornography, that he loved his girls. No one believed him. A month into his sentence, on September 3, 2013, Ariel Castro was found dead in his cell. He had hanged himself with a bedsheet. He died alone, but the story did not end with his death. Michelle Knight changed her name to Lily Rose Lee. She wrote a memoir. She got married. She became a speaker. But she still wakes up at night, flinching at footsteps. She had no family to return to, so she built one of her own. Amanda Berry became an advocate. She got a job at a news station, helping report on missing children. She raises Jocelyn, who grew up knowing her early life began in captivity, but who now thrives in freedom. Gina DeJesus returned to her family. She became a co-founder of a missing persons organization in Cleveland. She rarely gives interviews. She prefers action. All 3 women rebuilt. But they did not forget. The Seymour Avenue house was demolished. The lot stands empty, grass-covered, unmarked. A wound with no scar, but the city remembers, because 3 girls were taken, erased from life. And for 11 years, they were right there, screaming behind walls no one thought to question. This wasn't just a story of survival. It was a story of silence. A story about how someone can vanish in plain sight, and how a little girl named Jocelyn, born into a prison, became the spark that set them all free. Freedom was not immediate peace. For the 3 women who emerged from 2207 Seymour Avenue, escape was just the beginning of a new kind of trauma. One lived in the open, under the weight of the world's eyes and the unbearable silence of those 11 missing years. Michelle Knight was the one no one remembered. Her name had been forgotten almost immediately after she disappeared. She had no family pressing police for answers, no billboards, no public vigils. When she stepped out into the daylight on May 6, 2013, she had been presumed a runaway for over a decade. There was no safety net waiting for her, no place to go, no child to return to. Joey, the son she had been walking to court for on the day she was abducted, was now a teenager. He had been adopted by another family. Legally, emotionally, and permanently gone. Michelle was told not to try to contact him, and she didn't. She had waited 11 years to get back to him, and now that door was closed for good. She spent her first night of freedom in a hospital bed, not sleeping. The lights were too bright. The silence felt dangerous. She kept flinching at footsteps. At 4 a.m., a nurse found her sitting up, clutching a plastic fork like a weapon. She hadn't touched her food. She hadn't cried. She just kept asking for a pencil. When they gave her one, she drew flowers. Long-stemmed, curling toward the corners of the paper, blooming out of concrete. Amanda Berry had a different kind of reunion. She was surrounded instantly by family, aunts, cousins, neighbors, all flooding the hospital as soon as the news broke. But the person she needed most, her mother, was gone. Lawana Miller had spent 3 years after Amanda's disappearance doing everything humanly possible to find her. She'd called into psychic shows, written to senators, held press conferences. With her daughter's face printed on her shirt, In 2004, a psychic told her Amanda was dead, that her body was in water, that she should stop looking. Lawana collapsed after that interview. Less than 2 years later, she died of heart failure. But everyone who knew her said she died of grief. Amanda now had a daughter, Jocelyn, who had never seen the outside world. The little girl, 6 years old at the time, stared wide-eyed at the cars, the trees, the sky. In the hospital, she asked why the lights didn't flicker, why the doors didn't lock from the outside. When she used a real toilet for the first time, she clapped. She thought it was magic. Amanda realized she would have to raise a child while re-raising herself. She hadn't been to high school, had never driven, had never used a smartphone. The world had moved on without her. Now, she had to catch up while teaching Jocelyn what freedom meant. Gina DeJesus returned to a family who had never stopped looking. Her parents had kept her room exactly as it was. Posters on the walls, clothes in the closet. Her mother, Nancy, held her so tightly in the hospital room that nurses had to ask her to loosen her grip. Gina didn't speak for hours. When she finally did, the first thing she said was, "Do I still have to go to school?" She was 19 by then, but emotionally, she was still 14. Her last memories of the world before the horror were tied to middle school, math class, her best friend Arlene. The same friend whose father had kidnapped her. The realization that Ariel Castro, the man who beat and raped her, was the father of her best friend, shook her to the core. It took weeks for her to say his name. Even then, she didn't like to hear it spoken aloud. All 3 women were placed under protective care. Their locations were kept secret. The media was relentless. Helicopters circled. Reporters offered money. Paparazzi camped near their families' homes. They were offered interviews by every major network. Oprah, Barbara Walters, Dr. Phil, they said no. For a long time, they said nothing. Behind the scenes, investigators were piecing together the full extent of Ariel Castro's crimes. Every room in the Seymour Avenue house held evidence of his domination. There were diaries Amanda had written in secret. Michelle had scrawled dates and notes into a Bible, counting pregnancies, miscarriages, beatings. Some days she simply wrote, "I'm still alive." In total, Castro was found to have impregnated Michelle 5 times. Each time, she miscarried after deliberate physical assaults, starvation, blunt trauma to the abdomen. The medical examiner classified these miscarriages as a form of aggravated murder under Ohio law. Amanda's daughter, Jocelyn, had been born in captivity, a full-term birth in a plastic kiddie pool, with Michelle acting as midwife under threat of death. Castro had threatened to kill Michelle if anything went wrong. Amanda bled heavily, passed out. Michelle revived her. The baby cried. She lived. That child was the only human being Ariel Castro ever seemed to treat with something resembling care. He gave Jocelyn toys, a birthday cake, even outings into the yard once she was older, always while disguised or hidden. He painted a room for her in pastel colors, as if trying to rewrite his depravity through fatherhood. But even that was manipulation. Jocelyn was used to control Amanda, to reinforce the illusion that life could be normal, that she could be mother, partner, prisoner, all at once. During his interrogation, Ariel Castro blamed his behavior on addiction, pornography, loneliness. He said the girls were never kept against their will, that they could have left any time. The detectives didn't speak. They just slid the photographs of the chains across the table. He signed the plea deal not long after that, accepting life in prison without parole plus 1,000 years. The trial was bypassed to spare the women the agony of testifying, but Michelle Knight insisted on speaking at sentencing. She walked into the courtroom in a soft pink blouse and stood before the man who had stolen her entire adult life. She read from a crumpled piece of paper with perfect clarity. "You took 11 years of my life away. I spent 11 years in hell. Now your hell is just beginning." Castro cried, apologized, claimed he was sick, not evil. But no one listened. His crimes weren't just evil. They were calculated, sustained, predatory. In prison, he was placed under suicide watch. He claimed to be a good father. He wrote letters, tried to rewrite his own narrative. He didn't last long. On September 3, 2013, just 1 month into his sentence, Ariel Castro was found hanging by a bedsheet in his cell. He had died as he lived, isolated, self-centered, silent. When the news was announced, Michelle, Amanda, and Gina did not comment. They didn't need to. He was gone. After the shock faded and the headlines moved on, what remained was something far more difficult than escape: living again. The outside world, after 11 years in darkness, was not simply freedom. It was foreign, loud, too fast, too fragile. Michelle Knight had no family to welcome her. In fact, her own mother had doubted her disappearance for years, publicly stating she believed Michelle had run away. Their relationship had fractured long before her abduction, but now it was permanently severed. Michelle made a decision early. In her recovery, she would no longer answer to the name given to her by a family that failed her. She became Lily Rose Lee. A new name, a new beginning, a name that sounded like softness, like something that had bloomed despite the concrete. She wrote a memoir just 1 year after her escape, Finding Me, and revealed in its pages the full agony of what she endured. But it wasn't just pain. It was purpose. She began speaking publicly, especially to women in shelters, victims of abuse, and girls who believed they were forgotten. Because she knew what that felt like. To be forgotten. To be nobody. Michelle moved into her own apartment. She started painting again. She married a man named Miguel who had never seen a single headline about her, who knew her as Lily, not as the girl who lived in chains. He brought her sunflowers on their first date. She hung fairy lights across her living room. For the first time in her life, she wasn't just surviving. She was living. Amanda Berry walked a different road. She had Jocelyn, now entering elementary school, and 100 questions about how to protect a child who had been born in prison. Jocelyn was aware, from an early age, that she was part of a story larger than herself. She saw the reporters. She recognized her mother's name when whispered in public. She understood, slowly, that she had been born not into freedom, but into captivity. Amanda worked hard to normalize her life, enrolling Jocelyn in school, under a different last name, limiting interviews, creating boundaries, but Amanda couldn't stay invisible forever. She was, after all, one of the most recognized faces in America. Her name was synonymous with survival. In 2015, she joined Fox 8 News in Cleveland as a missing persons advocate. It was her way of using pain to power. Each week, she highlighted the cases of local missing people, children, adults, runaways, whose names didn't get national attention. She spoke directly to the families, reminded them someone still cared, because she had been the girl on the other end of the silence. When Amanda published her memoir, Hope, a memoir of survival, she did it with Gina DeJesus. They co-wrote the story together, alternating chapters, weaving their voices into a shared survival that stretched far beyond the walls of 2207 Seymour Avenue. Gina was the quietest of the three. Her family had never stopped fighting for her, and after her return, they fought to protect her peace. She didn't want cameras. She didn't want interviews. She just wanted to be home. But eventually, even she realized that silence had power, and speaking could take it back. In 2018, Gina co-founded the Cleveland Family Center for Missing Children and Adults, the very type of organization her family had once needed. She began working with law enforcement, building bridges between grieving families and the systems meant to help them. She knew exactly how it felt to be erased, so she made it her mission to keep others visible. In 2022, Gina became the executive director of the center. She was no longer the girl in the headlines. She was the woman who helped bring others home. Each of them found a different rhythm, a different healing. Michelle grew sunflowers on her balcony and adopted rescue dogs. Amanda drove Jocelyn to school and covered missing kids on live TV. Gina walked families through the agony of what to do in the first 48 hours after a child vanishes. They did not forget, but they moved forward. The city of Cleveland could not forget either. After the escape, the Seymour Avenue house became a pilgrimage site for weeks. Tourists, survivors, families of missing people, all came to see the ordinary house that hid extraordinary horror. But it wasn't long before city officials realized it couldn't remain. It was demolished on August 7, 2013. Just 3 months after the women were freed, Michelle Knight was there. She released yellow balloons into the sky and watched as the house collapsed under bulldozers. She smiled as the walls cracked and crumbled. Amanda and Gina did not attend. Each had her own way of processing the destruction of a place that had nearly destroyed them. In its place, the city planted grass. A small green lot, surrounded by a chain-link fence. No plaques, no markers, no reminders. But the neighborhood changed forever. Neighbors who once said nothing now questioned everything. Some admitted they had heard strange noises over the years. Banging, crying, even footsteps on the porch. But they dismissed it. Castro was known. He was odd, but familiar. He played music in his backyard, talked to kids, waved at old ladies. He hid evil behind routine. The guilt lingered. Why hadn't anyone asked questions? How could 3 women be hidden for 11 years in a house with neighbors just feet away? No answer ever satisfied. It was a wound that cleaved the city's sense of safety down the middle. But out of that wound came purpose. In the years that followed, dozens of laws were passed to improve missing persons response. Police departments overhauled their alert systems. Interagency coordination improved. Schools implemented better safety education. And families who once felt ignored found allies in Amanda, Gina, and Michelle. Their names stopped being tabloid fodder. They became hope. Over time, the chaos faded. The media moved on. New tragedies filled the headlines. But for Michelle, Amanda, and Gina, the aftermath never really ended. Trauma doesn't obey news cycles. It doesn't dissolve with the fall of a house or the sentencing of a monster. It lingers in smells, in closed doors, in a child's cry at 3 a.m. It lingers in silence. For Michelle, now Lily Rose Lee, trauma was a phantom she learned to name. Her PTSD came in waves. The feel of a locked door, the sound of duct tape, the metal click of a key. She would wake from dreams where her arms were still chained, unable to breathe. Even after years of therapy, there were nights she could still hear the boards on the windows, still smell the mold in the carpet, still feel the cold linoleum against her back. But Lily refused to remain defined by what was done to her. She started speaking across the country, not just to audiences, but to survivors, women in shelters, children in foster care, young girls in juvenile detention. She told them they mattered, that they were not invisible, that surviving was the beginning, not the end. She wrote a second memoir, Life After Darkness, in which she shared her healing journey, her marriage, her love for art, and her ability to forgive without forgetting. Her words reached beyond Cleveland. She became a symbol, not of victimhood, but of resilience, of rebirth. Amanda Berry remained steadfast in her mission to bring attention to the missing. Every week, she highlighted stories that mirrored her own, stories of girls and boys who vanished into the ether, whose families waited by the phone, watched the door, prayed for the impossible. She worked closely with police departments and families, providing a bridge between grief and action. She knew that feeling, the world forgetting your child. She never wanted another parent to feel that kind of abandonment. Jocelyn, her daughter, grew up in private. Amanda shielded her from the spotlight. When asked about motherhood, Amanda always said the same thing. She was the light in the darkness. She kept me going. Now I give her the life we both deserve. Gina DeJesus, quiet and composed, was a force behind the scenes. Her work at the Cleveland Family Center for Missing Children and Adults reshaped local outreach efforts. She worked on cases that spanned race, age, and socioeconomic barriers, knowing all too well that the world doesn't look for every child the same way. She rarely gave interviews, but when she did, her message was always direct. Never give up. Keep asking. Keep searching. Because someone out there is waiting to be found. Over time, their stories became books, documentaries, and lessons. In 2015, Lifetime aired Cleveland Abduction, a dramatized retelling of Michelle Knight's ordeal. Actress Taryn Manning portrayed her, but Michelle herself consulted on the script. She wanted it to be accurate, raw, not sensationalized. She wanted people to know what captivity really looks like. Netflix, CNN, and countless YouTube creators explored the case, some with care, others with exploitation. The women watched cautiously, aware that the world would never stop telling their story, whether they approved or not. But each of them reclaimed it in their own way. Amanda and Gina created the Cleveland Courage Fund, a nonprofit that raised over $1.4 million to support the women after their escape. When asked how the money would be used, they replied simply, to heal. Michelle used hers to disappear briefly, to travel, to walk in open fields, to visit the ocean, which she had never seen, to feel what air really smelled like when it wasn't recycled through fear. There were still hard days. Michelle had moments when she couldn't be touched, when Miguel, her husband, would reach for her hand and she'd flinch before remembering. She was safe now. Amanda sometimes stared out the window too long, watching cars pass, wondering if any of those faces were the ones who once saw the flyers and did nothing. Gina avoided the neighborhood altogether. She never drove by Seymour Avenue. The land was clean, green, and empty now, but the ghost still stood where the porch once was. Yet they kept going. Because survival is not just living, it's rebuilding. It's finding purpose in places that once held pain. In the years since their escape, hundreds of missing children have been found because someone learned about the signs. Someone spoke up. Someone, somewhere, remembered that 3 women had once screamed from behind walls and no one heard. Now, people listen differently, and that is part of their legacy. Today, if you walk down Seymour Avenue, there is nothing unusual about it. A row of houses, children's bikes in yards, a light breeze, birds, grass. But to those who remember, that block will never be ordinary again, because it once held the impossible, because it once swallowed 3 lives whole, and because one day, against all odds, those 3 lives walked back out into the light, heads high, chains broken, names reclaimed.